Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to this meeting of the City of York Council Planning Committee A on Thursday, the 1st of December 2022. Just some general housekeeping for those who may not be familiar with this space. If you do require toilets, through the door here marked toilets will also go out in this direction should there be an emergency. We hope there won't be any kind of emergency, but in that event, we would use the main stairs down and gather in the space in front of the Grand Hotel. All of those I'm expecting to be here are here in terms of members, with the exception of Councillor Wardby, who has sent apologies, and there is no substitute for Councillor Wardby. So with that, we'll move on with declarations of interest. At this point of the meeting, members are asked to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or any other registrable interest in respect of the business this evening, particularly if they haven't already done so in advance. Shall I continue? Okay. Do I need to start again?
No, it was just a repeat from the webcast. Well,
okay, fine. Okay. So are there any declarations of interest? Great, we'll proceed. There are no speakers who've registered for this point of the meeting, speaking to the general remit of this committee, but I'll take the opportunity just to note the sad news of the death of someone who was often contributed at this point in the meeting, who's well known to members of this committee, certainly well known to members of the planning team, Michael Hamill, who died last week. So with that, we continue our meeting. There are quite a number of minutes which I'm going to ask you to approve. So with reference to our meetings on the 8th of September, the 5th of October, and the 3rd of November, are there any issues? Councillor Melly.
Just a typo in the minutes from the 8th of September, in the kind of big paragraph on page 4, it says, when the application was approved the previous year, that should just say refused instead of approved, that's all.
Okay. Thank you very much.
but make sure we don't do it on the
I'll sign those when I have the opportunity later. So on our plans list this evening, we have two items. The first of these is for A, the extraction of clay and restoration of the site through the importation of inert waste land to the west of Newlands Lane. This is in the rural west ward. Can we first have any updates and introduce us to this application?
Thank you, Chair. I'll do the introduction first. So let's turn around. So it's a permission for the extraction of clay and restoration of the site through the importation of inert waste at land to the west of Newlands Lane. So you can see this is the view from the access track to the A59 that members saw at the visit on Tuesday. This is the boundary with Foss Dyke. Again, the surrounding area. That's the water body from the east. And that's the access track down into the site there that you can see. The view north. So we go to this is the application site outlined in red. Just a bit closer for members to see. These is the proposed site cabin that will be at, well, obviously at the site. And then this is probably the best plan to show you on. That's the phases of the development. So you can see each of the 6 phases there. This goes, that outlines each one there, so you can see in more detail. And then let's get to the last one. So this would be the remediation, where it would go to an oak dominant woodland. I'll pass you to Eric for the update. Back to that one. There you go.
Respect of the, I should go through it piece by piece. In respect to the draft conditions, the restoration plans, the active drawings are revision 313 revision A, 312 revision A, and 311 revision A. Since the report was prepared, we have received a further letter of representation, raising concerns about the ability of the applicant to complete the extraction proposed together with the restoration, and raising concerns in respect to the level of consultation that has taken place in respect of the proposal. The first point is dealt with in condition 1, which sets a 10-year time limit during which extraction and restoration activities must be undertaken and completed. I then go on to outline what has taken place in terms of consultation. It's advertised, it was publicised by a press notice in the York Press, site notices, 6 in all erected, neighbouring properties are also consulted, this in all in accordance with requirements of our statement of community involvement. There was also a public consultation exercise as part of the Poppleton neighbourhood plan, which this is an allocation within, and also the adopted North Yorkshire and York Minerals local plan, in which this is an allocation. Further on, there are points of clarification. The applicant has indicated that sufficient depth of clay will be retained on site after extraction and after restoration to ensure that any what is known as ground heave does not take place, leading to materials either from extraction or the restoration penetrating whatever groundwater resource there may be below. Thank you, Chair.
We have a number of public speakers. We have a number of speakers who've registered, and I'm going to invite them in turn. Each will have up to 3 minutes to address the committee. It would be helpful if you could bear in mind if a point has been made once, we don't need to hear the same point made a number of times. But otherwise, can I first invite Philip Runacres, who I understand is joining us by Zoom. Are you there?
I am there, Chairman. Thank you very much for inviting me and allowing me to speak. In the last 17 years of my working life, focused on diverting material away from landfill. I was a member of the senior management team of Viridor, a major landfill operator in the early 2000s, who strategically diversified firstly into recycling, then into energy from waste. Waste disposal by landfill is in decline due to government policy designed to end the practice. You should be aware of the waste hierarchy legislation, which states in order of desired method of disposal, firstly, prevention, i.e. don't make waste in the first place, reuse everything you can, recycle, then other recovery, which is where energy from waste comes in, and then finally, the method of last resort, disposal by landfill. Many of the large landfill operators, including Viridor, closed landfills early and didn't complete them because of the declining market. Viridor at one point had to pay for material to come into landfills to help finish off cells prior to capping due to the declining market. The resulting unplanned costs instead of receiving revenue were significant. Your joint plan is proposing creating a new hole in the ground that just shouldn't be done. The joint plan expected the Poppleton site to be operational about 5 years ago and to be halfway through its life now. The clay could have been used locally for the flood defence work that is being done now at Clifton and Rawcliffe, where work is expected to be complete in 2024. Too late for this site. Why has it taken the freeholder so long to bring the scheme forward with the applicant? Is it because it's borderline financially viable? The risk for the applicant is the restoration phase. Will there be enough material available to enable them to complete the work at a cost they can afford? My written objections detail the small size of the company, its limited assets. With 4 employees and 2 older directors, does it have a robust continuity plan? Assuming the clay is strategically important, surely a better use of the resulting hole in the ground is to use that hole to store water for irrigation on the nearby fields or balancing river levels. Since the joint plan was created, both councils have adopted new policies in response to climate change, zero carbon and the circular economy. Ask yourselves how new holes in the ground and filling them back with inert waste fits these policies. In my opinion, they don't. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm just looking to see whether any of the members have questions they would like to put to that speaker. I don't see any. Okay, thank you very much. With that, again, joining us on Zoom, I understand Neville Ward.
Yep.
Excellent. You've got up to 3 minutes if you want to address the committee.
Thank you. I have 5 reasons to object. Firstly, environmental damage which risks people's health. The application is an industrial mineral working and landfill site, which is very different to the adjacent flat and fertile farmland. The site is at risk of flooding and so polluting the surrounding area, including small foss. Small foss feeds into the Ouse, which provides our drinking water. Secondly, Newlands Lane is utterly unsuitable for heavy goods vehicles because it already prohibits vehicles over 7.5 tonnes. Newlands Lane is a single track rural road without a usable verge. It is used by cyclists, runners and pedestrians of all ages, which the Highway Code places at the top of the hierarchy of road users. And yet I calculate this application introduces one 20-tonne lorry every 15 minutes, 6 days a week. 20-tonne lorries risk causing the greatest harm. Thirdly, the A59 is already a dangerous road. At 7 a.m. on Sunday, the 13th of March this year, a 24-year-old man died between the junctions of Newlands Lane and Hodgson Lane. There will be more tragic accidents. Fourthly, the principal development control engineer notes, Newlands Lane appears to offer an attractive route between the A59 A1237 for car drivers to avoid congestion. Car drivers will see 20-tonne lorries using Newlands Lane, which will further raise awareness of such an attractive route. Traffic cutting through Poppleton will increase, many of which are already speeding. On the morning of Wednesday, 2nd of December 2020, I was unfortunate enough to witness a dog being hit by a car that had chosen this attractive route. The dog died. Fifthly, there has not been sufficient consultation and involvement with either local residents or the general public. The applicant mentions a statement of community involvement, yet the only evidence I saw was a planning site notice. The application came as a surprise to me, and so both residents and the public will be surprised when extraction commences and waste is deposited. Surprises are completely at odds with the guiding principles in consulting the community. To conclude, COP26 called for all of us to make rapid, radical changes. We cannot carry on as before. The Joint Minerals and Waste Local Plan is dated 2013 and so should not be blindly followed. Approving this application would be more of the same and not the rapid, radical change we need to build a circular economy that is in balance with our one and only planet.
30 seconds.
What questions do you have for me?
Councillor Kilbane has a question.
Well, I would not like to disappoint the public speaker. So the question, I'd like to understand a bit more how you think inert waste would pollute the surrounding soil and countryside.
There are documents on the site showing that this area is at risk of flooding. Flooding is only going to get worse, as we all know from climate change and media reports. Water's going to go in, it's going to mix with whatever goes in there, which may be inert waste. And that subsequent flooding then goes into small foss. And I believe small foss goes into the Ouse, which Yorkshire Water use to get our drinking water.
Thank you. A further question?
Yeah, and the other question is to do with climate change. In what way would this be detrimental to reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
Right, it's not just greenhouse gas emissions, it's also we are called upon to look after our environment. We have flat and fertile farmland in the surrounding area. This is an industrial mineral working, that is mining, and it's ripping up the countryside that we already have, and it's putting landfill, inappropriate materials back in. It's not a restoration of site, it's a transformation of this site into something completely different, a domed area with fast-growing timber, which is of only use to be burned. It's not appropriate for the surrounding area. So it's not just CO2 emissions, it's preserving our environment.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. We have a third speaker who's present. Can I invite Councillor Hook to come to the microphone?
Thank you, Chair. Right, Mr. Wood has gone through, mentioned the problems of access to Newlands Lane. I just want to explain a bit more about that. The single track roads around Poppleton are used for recreation by lots of villagers. You'll often see them in the evenings, at weekends, lovely summer evenings, walking dogs, just going for a stroll. And I get the benefit of that as councillor because they tell me anything that's been going on, any hedges been cut down, any trees been cut down, I'll soon hear about it because so many people walk around that area. Also, if you live in Hesse, which has no footpath whatsoever to get there if you're a cyclist or a walker, to minimise your time on the A59, you turn off into Newlands Lane because that way then you're away from all the nasty lorries and everything on the A59. Which is quite scary because I've cycled the bit between Newlands Lane and the turn off for Hesse, and I know you don't want to do that too often. The verges on Newlands Lane, when I went to see it with the highways officer, had recently been mown and they were low and they were flat and they were lovely. But I've never seen them like that before or since. And I did talk to the highways person and he said, yes, well, perhaps we can make sure that they're regularly maintained and kept low. Because if you're a cyclist or a walker and you see one of these great big lorries coming for you, you want to get up onto the verge. But it's not always easy because you've got briars and you've got nettles and it's awful. And also, if you go too far back, there are dikes at the back of the two verges as well. So you could end up falling into the water, which is quite a nasty fall, and you could be done for. With my bike, I couldn't even lift it up onto the verge some parts because it's so high, and my bike's quite heavy and I'm not that strong. So all that sort of thing, it's all very well saying they're going to put new laybys in, but that's for traffic, not motorized traffic, not for pedestrian traffic and cyclists. And I just think all these people who love to use that lane are just going to be, put in danger, and it just removes the amenity of all the villagers because they won't ever want to go that way. And how do people get to and from Hesse? So that's all I just wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Wait for a moment because there may be questions from members. Again, Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Anne. Is it a much used recreational route then, Newlands Lane to Hesse?
Sorry. I met this elderly lady in Hesse who told me how she'd walked to the co-op in Poppleton and luckily got a lift home. And she walked down Newlands Lane. So it's the way to get there. If you want to cycle to Hesse, that's the way you do it, because you obviously don't want to go down the A59 for more than you have to. Yeah.
Yeah, because I would imagine walking or cycling along the A59 on that stretch would not be a very pleasant experience.
But you've got no choice.
I guess that link needs to be improved, really, doesn't it? Okay, all right, okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. And again, in person, Chris Jarvis, I understand, in support on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Jarvis and I'm here today on behalf of the applicant. I'd firstly like to thank the case officer, Mr. Matthews, for ensuring that this matter was presented to you today. The application was submitted to the council in November 2021. However, it's been in development for far longer than that. As your officers have stated in their report, the site is allocated for the extraction of clay and restoration with inert materials in the Joint Minerals and Waste Local Plan adopted by this authority in April of this year. However, consultation on the allocation of the application site within that document was first undertaken in 2014. The site is also identified in the adopted Poppleton neighbourhood plan for those same purposes. Again, extensive public consultation was undertaken in the preparation of that plan, which culminated in a referendum in 2017, in which over 91% of those who voted did so in favour of the plan. The development set out in this application has been carefully designed to minimise potential impacts and has been subject to extensive assessment and scrutiny. The excavation has been designed based upon detailed site investigation. It's proposed to extract clay to a maximum depth of 9 metres above ordnance datum, that is some 4 to 6 metres below existing ground levels, and leaving between 1 and 3.5 metres of clay untouched at the bottom of the void. This material would act as a barrier between the excavated site and any groundwater below. Hydrogeological assessment demonstrates that the risk to groundwater is low. The applicant has liaised with the Environment Agency and Internal Drainage Board in respect of flood risk and drainage. The proposed development has been demonstrated to create no increased risk of flooding, would ensure that the Drainage Board's assets were protected, and subject to the measures set out in the application, would have no impact upon the water quality of either Foss Dyke or the River Ouse. Prior to works commencing, the applicant must obtain an environmental permit to allow the importation of inert material for restoration. Once approved, the permit would impose strict conditions on the types of material that could be accepted. The applicant is very experienced in these matters, having operated a similar facility at Escrick since 2008. And after almost 15 years of operation, that site remains in the lowest risk banding available. The applicant is committed to ensuring that no HGV enter or leave the site via Upper Poppleton, and has designed a site entrance to ensure that this cannot happen. The applicant is also committed to upgrading passing places along Newlands Lane and providing maintenance to the highway verge. Restoration of the site would take place on a phased basis to an after use appropriate to the site's location, and is informed by the City of York Community Woodland to the south. Your officers have recommended the imposition of conditions that would ensure that restoration works were undertaken in accordance with the submitted documents. I would reiterate that the application site is allocated in both the recently adopted Minerals and Waste Local Plan and the Poppleton Neighbourhood Plan for exactly the purposes set out in this application. I would therefore respectfully request that members accept your officer's recommendation and grant planning permission for the proposed development. Thank you.
Other questions? Councillor Fenton, and then Fisher, and then Looker.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the proposed reinstatement details, some concerns have been raised about the proposed oak woodlands proposal for the site in terms of how it would sit in the existing context of what is relatively sort of flat open space. I just wondered what discussions you'd had or what the process was that had led you to that proposal, please.
So the site sits within the White Rose Forest area. It's just to the northwest of where the City Council is promoting the community woodland there. The species mix and the specification for the restoration is based upon the community woodlands scheme, and the landscape architect who drafted our scheme liaised with the community woodland officers in developing the specification for that. The White Rose Forest, of which this is part, it seeks to increase woodland throughout Yorkshire, I think from 11% at the moment to 19% over the coming years. And this is very similar to the scheme that we are currently undertaking at Escrick.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. My question also concerns the restoration. It says on page 34 of the report, restoration would be using 390,000 cubic metres, which is about 500,000 tonnes of sifted inert soils to create a woodland and wetland area. How can you guarantee that the soil is going to be inert? And secondly, how can you ensure that that quantity of material doesn't contain any harmful invasive species like knotweed or Himalayan balsam?
So the way that the site operates will be in accordance with an environmental permit, which is yet to be applied for and issued by the Environment Agency. That will impose on the applicant conditions requiring material to be tested prior to its importation. So how this works take the existing site that the applicant operates. So site condition reports, site assessments are provided to the applicant or to the site operator. The site operator determines whether they meet their waste acceptance criteria, which form part of the environmental permit. If the material meets the waste acceptance criteria, clearly, in this case, it has to be inert, then it is accepted. If it doesn't meet the waste acceptance criteria, it doesn't come on site. If it comes on site by mistake, it's quarantined and removed from site as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Councillor Looker.
Yes, I think we all seem to be of one mind. I wondered why, usually when you dig holes, we see them all over the place, usually a very common practice is to leave the hole, especially if you have got a significant amount of clay residue, to create water, a water environment, which is, I mean, that's what there's there now, isn't it? There's this pond that has arisen because people did extract clay. And I just wondered why we're not reincorporating a water rather than try and bring in lots of stuff to fill in your holes, make use of the hole because heaven knows we need plenty of places for birds to go, and holes and ponds and water is often excellent rather than bringing in a lot of earth from somewhere. I just wondered why you're not considering water.
Mr. Matthews, if I could ask if you would put the plan up that showed the phasing of the site, I'd be ever so grateful. So if I can just talk you through, if I may, Councillor, if I can just talk you through this a little bit. Phase one of that site is proposed to be restored to at or below ground levels. So there will be, Mr. Matthews referred to a water area. There'll be a sort of transitory water area in phase one there. And that part of the site will be restored using material that is already on site. That won't involve any material that's imported from off-site. The rest of the site is proposed to import material. Despite what you've heard, and clearly government policy is such that it encourages other means and other methods of waste management than disposal. But there are some materials for which recycling, for which recovery of energy don't work. And inert materials, so those materials that arise from building new houses, building new schools, new development, has nowhere to go. It can be used in quarry restoration. There are a few sites around York, predominantly in North Yorkshire, but there are not many sites that manage inert waste. So if you think about the development that's happening along the A59, there's rather a significant amount of development occurring that will generate clean inert material, and that has to go somewhere.
Okay, just looking at that plan, though, you are retaining some of the water in, is that phase whatever it is?
That the water body that's shown on that plan there, Councillor, is retained until the end of the development, and that allows the water that is found in other phases of the works to be pumped into that lagoon there to allow any sediment to settle out. That will be filled in as phase 6 of the development. So that water body will not be retained.
Thank you. Councillor de Gorne.
Yes, one of the concerns that's been raised is about obviously the lorry traffic and how that potentially conflicts with walking, cycling. And I'm aware you've got measures to provide passing places, but I can't see anything in here about the likely hours of operation. There was some reference about possible lighting that might be needed at certain times of the year. What is the normal, I mean, we're talking about what number of vehicles an hour, and what sort of times of day and week would that normally take place?
I think, Mr. Matthews, there's a condition on the draft condition on there setting out the hours of operation.
Condition 10, page 45. Condition 10, page 45.
Okay, that answers your question.
I must have missed that. Yeah, that answers that point. Thank you.
And that answers your question fully. You were asking about a number of things there.
Well, the other question was about what was the likely pattern of vehicle movements during those times of operation, presumably.
Chair, I think this is dealt with in paragraph 5.16 of the report on page 38. I read it as saying that it's anticipated there would be an average of 2 lorry movements per hour. Am I?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Doughty.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually a supplementary really to what Councillor de Gaugne's asked. One of the consultee objections highlights noise as one of their reasons for objecting in the effect on residential amenity because of that. And in the conditions, you quite rightly point to point 10 on page 45 about the hours of operation. Just ahead of that, it mentions some various conditions relating to the construction traffic management plan. So just first of all, some clarification that the hours of operation are just not linked to the construction management plan, but for the entire period of operation. But then also, one of the bullet points indicates measures to reduce noise from within the site. Can we have clarification as to what these measures will involve, please?
Okay, so the measures that would be utilised would be pretty standard measures during operation. So it would be things like white noise reversing alarms and matters such as that. So rather than the beeping that you get on machinery, you would use plant or you would install in the plant white noise reversing beepers which have a different tone and are not as intrusive as a white noise as a traditional reversing alarm on plant and machinery. Introducing things like speed limits on site access roads and haul roads would reduce noise and adherence to those hours of operation. The application, the environmental statement includes a noise assessment which demonstrates that the operation of the site would not give rise to excessive noise, would not give rise to an impact upon amenity at the closest noise sensitive properties.
Okay, so when we come to officer questions, I would just like confirmation on how that would be monitored.
Yeah, you'll have that opportunity in a moment, Councillor. At this point, I don't see any other questions. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 5.16 that we're just looking at says that staff would travel to the site in their own vehicles. Are there any possible alternatives to that? Have any other ways of staff travelling to the site been considered?
So the site will not be labour intensive. It will be a small number of staff that are working there. So yeah, there are other alternatives. They might turn up in a wagon, but it will be 2 or 3 members of staff on site.
So no ways of people getting to the site by active travel or a company car share scheme or anything else like that?
I'm quite happy to look at anything that councillors would like to look at, but as I say, it's not going to be a labour intensive operation.
Okay. I think we've exhausted our questions. So thank you very much.
Hi, it's Mr. Ward here. I know I've had my chance to speak, but I'd like to make just 3 points based on some of the clarification questions.
I think we've had that opportunity.
Okay.
We moved on with the meeting. But thank you for your contribution earlier.
Thank you.
So now we have the opportunity to ask further questions, this time, of course, of the officers present, and there may be others who are available to us. Can I just remind officers, when you are responding, begin by introducing yourself and your job title. Councillor Pavlovic.
Just a quick one. Is the mineral and waste plan and the Poppleton neighbourhood plan, do they form part of the overall local plan? Are they incorporated within that? So I need to know. Thank you.
Yes, they've been adopted.
Okay. Councillor Eyre.
Very simple question based on the conversation we just had and my experience today. So on page 45 in the conditions, it refers to wheel washing. But then on page 38 in the report, it refers to wheel washing of HGVs. Now, having followed a small digger with tiger tracks down or dumping half of Heworth Green with the contents of the gasworks, does the condition just apply to HGVs, or is that just an erroneous comment in the report? Does the condition include all vehicles to be undertaken wheel washing?
Yeah, that you go with the condition because that's what goes on the decision notice. It's an erroneous comment. It needs to be wheel washing. Like you say, it can be anything of any size.
Okay. Councillor Fenton.
Just looking at condition 7, page 44, the sort of second paragraph of condition 7. It refers to upgrading of passing places, and from memory, when the applicant spoke, I don't know whether you mentioned an increase in the number of passing places. So when we come to looking at the conditions, would it be reasonable to amend that second part of condition 7 to talk about an increase in the number of passing places as well as an upgrading? Upgrading suggests putting a bit of tarmac on existing passing places, but would it be reasonable to potentially amend that to include an increase in the number of passing places as well as the upgrading of existing ones?
Sorry, I realised I should have introduced myself last time. Like you said, it's Becky Eads, Head of Planning and Development Services. Yes, you can add that. It's a reasonable thing to ask for. We haven't, because obviously we've done it in conjunction with highways and they consider the upgrade of the existing is sufficient. But if members consider that they want that amending to say, we'd have to ask for a scheme to look at any additional ones and where we can't just agree now because we don't know exactly where they could go and the conflicts and everything else. But if you think that you need additional ones, that's a reasonable thing to add in a condition.
That's helpful. Please do. Councillor Murray.
Does the nature of the lane allow for additional passing places? Or does that involve removal of any hedge or anything like that we need to consider?
Eric Matthews, Development Management Officer. The verges are wide. There are issues in terms of vegetation in parts, but it would not involve the removal of any hedge if appropriately they were to be identified.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
That's why it'd need to be a scheme because we'd need to work out exactly how it would work. I couldn't promise exactly what it would be, but we could work.
But it could work. It's feasible to add.
It's just how it would work.
Yeah.
And Councillor Murray, did you have a further question?
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
This is not the sort of development I've ever really seen before. I'm not familiar with it. So condition 1 is slightly different from usual just because the nature of the development is different. So it says that the development should be undertaken within 10 years of the date of the permission. Does that mean absolutely all of it, every single phase and the restoration and everything needs to be completed within 10 years? Yeah.
Yes, everything. It's to ensure that you don't have the situation where it is part started or the restoration is part completed and then just left.
And that time frame, is that something that's been agreed with the developer, like in conversations to know that
it's a standard one in terms of mineral applications.
Okay, so we know that it's a reasonable time frame. Great. I had a question while we've got the plans up on the screen. Where is the section of hedge that's to be removed? And then I don't know if we have a kind of site plan that goes out wider, but I was wondering where the White Rose woodland is that's mentioned, because some of the objectors have said that the plans for restoration aren't in keeping with the surrounding countryside, but the report also says it is in keeping with a nearby woodland. So I was just wondering if you could tell us more about that and maybe show it on any plans.
The hedge to be removed, is it at this top end?
Can you use the microphone?
The hedge to be removed is at this top left, top northwestern hedge to allow for the access into the site compound to be formed. You could have probably the location plan is probably the best to explain where the White Rose woodland is.
Sorry, I should have asked it before you move on from this one. Is it 50 metres of hedge?
Yes, that is
Is it
correct.
50 metres of hedge? So why is it necessary to be that wide? Is that to allow two directions of traffic with room to see oncoming traffic? Is that?
That's part of it, and it's also lifting in the plant, the digger, and also the cabin.
Okay, thanks.
That's it.
Okay, is that it for now?
Yeah. The White Rose Woodland. Oops, wrong one. It's that one. White Rose Woodland is down here. In the vicinity, or it's in the vicinity of Napton.
Okay. Councillor Eyre, then Councillor Pavlovic.
Sorry, I'm going back to passing places again now. You just set hairs on my head when you said about the fact that the existing verges are quite wide. Now, a HGV will be less concerned about passing places than a family hatchback will be. They will just ride over whatever they need to ride. So I noticed on condition 8 on page 44, it does refer to a dilapidation survey of the highways. Does that include the state of the grass verges? Because my concern would be that what will happen is the HGVs, rather than waiting for the passing places, will just use the grass verges to get past, thus destroying all the subsequent grass verges. So would that, I could add that.
Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you. It's just going back to this woodland idea. The ecology officer has suggested an alternative approach for the restoration project, which is a flood meadow. Whilst I appreciate the closeness to the White Rose forest, why was that dismissed and the woodland area chosen instead?
It's a difference of opinion between ecologists. They are equal. Both of them have pluses and minuses. Our landscape architect was quite favourable to the idea of the restoration as woodland, and historically there would have been groups of woodland within the surrounding landscape. It's just that in recent historical time, this has not formed part of the landscape history of this part of the Vale of York. There is, for sustainability reasons, a move to go towards woodland, and it's on that basis, on balance, and gone with that form of restoration.
Cool. So it wasn't. It was based purely on the carbon footprint, as opposed to what may be more in keeping with the surrounding fields. Because I mean, if you took it as if you took the point that yes, it was all woodland at one stage. Well, if you go back long enough, York was all woodland. So I'm just wondering, given that some of the objectors were saying a field of trees surrounded by flatness would look incongruous. A field meadow, a flood meadow, would keep that vista, wouldn't it?
It would, but we're not talking about this. If you go within the wider landscape, there are areas of this type of woodland. It's a question of choosing between two equally acceptable alternatives.
Councillor Fisher.
Bearing in mind there are a lot of disused brick ponds on there, I would argue that the case for more wetland areas is less vital because there are a lot of ponds in the area. There are a number of woodland areas, and I mean biodiversity means a diversity of habitats. Is it not correct, I'm not correct, that there is a council policy to increase the amount of woodland cover in the city? And this would therefore be in accordance with that.
I'm not aware of it. I mean, there is a council want to increase woodlands in terms of planning policy.
That's planning policy, just.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Melly. I'm aware, Councillor Doughty, you were asking or began to ask a question when we still had the public speaker there. Do you want to take this opportunity?
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. So obviously in terms of noise mitigation and bearing in mind the hours of operation that this would be limited to, how would the council monitor noise? Because I'm guessing it would be difficult to confirm any statutory nuisance if operations were limited to those hours. So are there any other means that the council would monitor noise?
If we had complaints, then we could look at it through that way, through our public protection. At this moment in time, we need details of how the measures of noise will be reduced, and we've got to agree that with colleagues in public protection. So we don't know at this moment in time exactly what they will be to then monitor it from there. So there are ways of us doing it. I can't answer it at the moment because I don't know what the measures will be yet.
Thank you. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, this is supplementary to an earlier question, really. But in terms of highway safety and the impact on all highway users, this kind of roughly 20 two-way HGV movements in an average of 2 per hour, is that likely to be quite evenly spread across all the hours of operation, or are they likely to be clumped in certain kind of batches, and what impact does that have on other highway users? I'm not sure that we had that level of information. I think we were given what they would be and what that broke down to, but I don't think we had that specific, unless Ian might be able to answer it.
Join us at the table, Ian. Just give your name and job title.
I have the mic on. Hi, yeah, I'm Ian Stokes. I'm Principal Highway Development Control Officer for Planning. My understanding is that the operation of the mining of the clay and the extraction of the clay is a continuous operation. So it's a regular cycle of a tipper truck coming in, being loaded up, going out, the other one then following it in, being loaded out, going out. So it is half hourly on a regular cycle.
And what are the impacts on highway safety, especially for pedestrians and cyclists of that nature?
I mean, two extra movements an hour is minimal. It is a country lane, but it does have a weight restriction, but it does allow for access, and that allows for access for a future use as well as a current use, as long as that is the means of access to the use.
Okay, so what are the large vehicle movements like currently then? Are there also already like large vehicles?
We don't have detailed records of HGV movements or large vehicle movements along that lane. I've been out there on a bike and not noticed any.
So if there currently aren't any, does that mean this is a significant change?
It's a change. Any change makes a difference, but whether it makes a substantial or significant difference on highway safety, we believe it doesn't.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions? I don't see any more questions. So that being the case, we move to the point where we can debate this and come to a decision between us. Who would like to help us to do that and make a start? Go ahead, Councillor Poppleton.
Thank you, Chair. I understand all all the concerns of residents, and I think many of the fears are understandable. However, there have been processes over some period of years for concerns to have been highlighted, and as I clarified earlier, for the public's benefit more than anything else, the mineral and waste plan and the Poppleton neighbourhood plan were widely consulted and did go through formal processes, and they both accepted this site was a suitable one for this very development that we see in front of us today. And therefore I struggle to decide that I could vote against a local plan policy. So I would therefore propose, subject to the amendments that I can't remember what they are that were written down, that the proposal be approved.
Councillor Fisher.
Bit like the plan.
Thank you, Chair. I echo Councillor Pavlovich's comments. I mean, the neighbourhood plan has been out to extensive consultation. It was voted through in a referendum. This is an allocated site in it for mineral extraction. I do understand the residents' concerns about highways and the use by pedestrians, cyclists and such like of Newlands Lane, the possible conflict with vehicles. I think the conditions 7 to 9 of the highways conditions do deal with that. It's also true that in my experience on council, I have never seen a planning application defended on appeal when on highways grounds when the highways officers have raised no objections, and clearly our highways officers have not raised objections, and therefore I don't think it would be possible to defend an appeal on highways grounds. But I do think we need to make sure those conditions are absolutely watertight to protect pedestrians, cyclists and other users of that lane as far as possible. But I will also be supporting approval.
Okay. Councillor Fenton and then Councillor de Gorn.
I agree with what's been said. I think what I would like to ask for is the, as I mentioned earlier, the second part of condition 7. Becky talked about referring to a scheme. And so I would want that to include, as well as upgrading of passing places, looking at possible expansion in the number of passing places, and weaving in some wording around maintenance of verges. We heard from Councillor Hook about when she visited, they were pristine, but for the rest of the time they're overgrown and not usable. I suppose you could argue if they were overgrown and unusable, HGVs are less likely to drive on them. But I think if, again, if that could also be conditioned in terms of as a requirement of the operation of the site that HGVs don't, as a matter of course, mount the verges, but that may be a step too far. But I think something around a scheme that looks at an increase in the number of passing places as well as upgrading existing ones, and something about maintaining the verges so they're in a usable state for pedestrians and possibly not cyclists. It would be difficult to mount the verge and cycle along, risk falling into a ditch, which obviously nobody would want. So if I'm not asking you to come up with the wording now, but you can sort of tell us whether you think that's achievable, that would be, give me some assurance.
Do you want to respond?
I've been looking at this. I actually would recommend that you take away that part out of part 7, condition 7, and make it a condition on its own right. So you put a condition for a scheme for the upgrade and increase in the number of passing places. That becomes, just take that out fully out of 7 and do it as its own right. In terms of your highway verge, yes, in terms of if. So the condition is, condition 8 says dilapidation survey. That needs changing, and I need to think about that because it needs to say it's all right getting a survey, but then we need to make sure there's something actually done with it. No, we need to change that one. So I'd recommend you change 8 that says, yes, you get a dilapidation survey, but you also then, if there's works at X, Y, and Z point, that is maintained. So yeah, I would recommend taking that out and changing 8 to make it more fit for purpose, like you just said.
Can we delegate that?
Presumably that's something we could delegate to chair and vice chair. Yeah, okay. Councillor de Gorn.
Yes, I would certainly support that, and I think the point was made about it because we're talking about 10-year consent. So during the course of those 10 years, there would be an annual maintenance of verges might be something which could be included within there, so that sight lines and pedestrian use is suitable for using those as appropriate. In terms of more general points about, as has been said, it's been clearly identified in the waste and minerals plan, thank you, and neighbourhood plan. And I think we do need to take on board the point that where we're requiring development and flood defences and so on, the material that is used in those has to come from somewhere. And if part of the plan within the waste and minerals plan is to ensure that that is available from local sources, which don't involve transferring it from the other side of the country, wherever possible. So on that sort of basis, this does make sense to have that, provided all the safeguards that have been put in here as conditions are done to ensure that it minimises impact on the local community and any safety on the access route into the site. And I think the other point which is worth mentioning is the condition about access to and from the site being restricted so that it is physically impossible for lorries to turn out in the opposite direction, so that is part of the design, that short point to where they're getting onto a major highway is the only route which is used to and from the site, in unless emergencies or whatever. But that's one of the conditions, I believe.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. It is. Councillor.
It was just probably a quick check with Sandra in terms of how far we can go with that condition around verges, knowing as we probably all will when it comes to residential verges. Our advice is, unless you actually, even if they park on the grass verge every single day, 12 hours a day, and you can clearly see the damage underneath, unless you can prove at that explicit moment that they physically caused the damage at that time, we aren't able to enforce on residential. How far can we go with this one? We're going to have to be measuring the width of tyre tracks and say that was clearly a HGV tyre track. But yeah.
You might.
Yeah, just see how far we can go and make sure that we go as far as we can, so people don't come back in 2 years' time and go, well, that was nothing to do with us. That was residents that were driving through that particular verge.
Thank you, Chair. Sandra Brannigan, Legal Officer. Well, it might actually be another one for Ian's assistance. I'm not sure how far we can go, as you suggest. I mean, I think there's talk about a dilapidation survey.
Yeah. You'd need your dilapidation survey first, and then, as Councillor de Gorn suggested, on a yearly basis, you would then look and see because hopefully with the passing places there won't be any. But yeah, I'm not saying it's going to be particularly easy, but it's reasonable to impose it. It's just to what degree. You are right.
It was just to try and avoid the annual comeback of they may not do, but they may be wonderful, but they may just come back and say, well, actually, that was nothing to do with us. That's somebody else that's damaged that verge, not us. We're not going to give you any.
It would be remiss of us to say that could happen. So it could happen, but you would hope through the conditions and through the use of the passing places that it wouldn't happen to a degree and that they would work with us. But I can't guarantee it.
I'm just giving Ian the opportunity to comment if he has anything that might be helpful for us just at this moment.
The only thing that I could possibly add with that is that we would have an idea of the type of vehicles that would be using the road. It has a weight restriction except for access only, so it would only be justified users of the road to have access if they are larger than 7.5 tonnes. There may be some farm vehicles on there, but probably not many. So any major damage to the verge is likely to be done by larger vehicles, which may be most likely to be attributable to the development. So it should be pretty apparent who's causing the damage.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Kilbane.
Oh, thanks, Chair. I hear the highways concerns. I'm sure you'll come up with an amendment that takes care of that as much as we possibly can. I've got to say, I think the main highways concern here is people walking and cycling on the A59 to get to the point. We can add that to the long list of active travel routes that we continue to grow. I can see no planning grounds for refusing this application, especially seeing as how it's in the local plans, and I'm very happy to approve it.
Okay. I think we've come to the point where we can vote.
Chair.
Do we actually have someone who has proposed and seconded?
I proposed.
You proposed?
Councillor Fisher
So, having been proposed by Councillor Pavlovic and seconded by Councillor Fisher, and if you could just be clear what it is that we're now voting on.
So it's a slightly amended, so you're voting on the change to the condition in the additional information, the change to the condition, removing the passing places from condition 7 and doing it as its own condition, and then amending the condition 8 with regard to highway verge also included in that, along with an annual maintenance. Those to be delegated to the chair and deputy chair. The wording of those two conditions that you don't have in front of you now.
Is that okay?
Chair, may I come in here just to mention that, Becky, I think that there may need to be a slight tweak to condition 1 as well, just based on an answer that Eric gave earlier. Am I right in thinking, Eric, that you said earlier that the extraction and the remediation or restoration both have to take place within 10 years? Or is it the extraction takes place within 10 years and then after that, the scheme of...
It's all within 10 years.
In that case, I think, Chair, that there needs to be a slight tweak to
be clear.
Yeah, just to make that clearer,
Okay.
that they both have to take place within within that 10
That's
years.
helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, with all of that said, can we now put that to vote? Those in favour of approval, please indicate. That's unanimous. That is approved. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think it might be helpful just to have a couple of minutes, reconvene at 20 minutes to. Thank you, members. As we reconvene this meeting of the City of York Council Planning Committee, and we move on to item 4B. This is an application with reference to land to the east of Middlewood Close in Rufforth for the erection of 21 dwellings associated works. It is a resubmission. If we could begin, please, with an introduction and updates on this.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do the introduction. So this is an application for the erection of 21 dwellings and associated works. You can see the existing entrance from Middlewood Close here into the site. The existing field track boundary to school lane, school field even. That's from the site looking towards the main road. Oops, sorry, gone too far. That's an extract from the proposals maps within the local plan. Your application site is a site in red, other land is outlined in blue. And that is your proposed site layout plan. You can see the access in off Middlewood Close here. Access arrangements and the new dwellings to either side. Just again, street scenes there that you can see from either side. Again, house types, they're all in your pack, so we'll go through them. I'll leave that one up there and pass to Mark for your update. Sorry.
Introduce yourself, Mark.
Mark Baldry, Development Management Officer. In terms of additional information and updates since the report pack was published, we've received an updated set of consultation comments from colleagues in the planning policy team. Primarily, these reaffirm the position set out in the report in terms of the various sort of status and position of the draft local plan policies. Elements to note, however, are that in terms of, they've confirmed that in terms of the allocated site H38, there are no outstanding Regulation 19 objections to the allocation of that site. However, they note that only limited weight can be afforded to policy H1 given the level of outstanding objections to the wider policy as a whole, but there isn't any outstanding objections to the allocation of this particular site. They've also confirmed the position in terms of a 5-year housing land supply and confirmed that that's currently stands at 3.4 years, so it wouldn't be MPPF compliant. Finally, just by way of clarification, the reasons at paragraph 5113 in the report, it states that very special circumstances are set out and summarised in paragraph 5106. It's actually 5108. That's just a typo as the reports have gone through the editing process. No other comments or representations received, and ultimately the additional information doesn't alter the planning balance or recommendation that's set out in the report pack.
Thank you. We have a number of registered speakers. As before, I think most of you were here through the earlier item. So up to 3 minutes, if you will, to address the committee. The first I have here in person is Daniel Russell, wishes to speak in objection. Just make sure the microphone is on. That's the button that lights up green.
Hello, everyone. My name's Dan. The last time this came forward, I was only available on Zoom, but here I am in person to put my views forth. I thought your debate about this last time was really well considered and then came to a firm conclusion, and nothing has changed in this development whatsoever in this resubmission. I could leave it at that, but what I will do is reiterate the points I made last time. Namely, the residents of Middlewood Close still have their drains pumped out on a regular basis by Yorkshire Water, and nothing in this plan is designed to solve that issue. This is still in the green belt, and it hasn't moved. and was considered an inappropriate development last time round. And I can't see any logical reason why that would have changed in the course of the last few months. And finally, I still live to the southeast directly of this proposed development, where 15 years ago, my family put forward planning permission for a private riding facility as an appropriate use of the greenbelt. And I still have that riding arena right next to the proposed development. About the width of this table away is a hedge separating our riding arena from the proposed gardens of these developments. Still nothing's changed here because I haven't spoken to a developer or a planning officer or a landowner about this. They're still hoping that you consider this my first world problem. But there is a principle of the existing utility and amenity of land. You cannot ride a horse next to somebody's garden when they could kick a ball over at you, they could start a lawnmower, they could run a hedge trimmer at any point. We've been doing that for 15 years right there because it was approved as being in a nice quiet spot where that can be done as an appropriate use of the greenbelt. So being as nothing has changed, I am hoping that you can have yet another robust debate about the pros and cons of this development and come to the conclusion that it is against the existing utility of the land of my house at Utrey Close. It's massively against the interests of the residents of Middlewood Close, and it is still in the greenbelt because nothing's changed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Don't rush off. It may just be that there's a question or two from members. Councillor Melly.
What consideration to those points was there at the draft local plan stage, consultations as part of that?
I think all of these were raised by residents during the draft local plan stage, and this site was first included and then taken out because it's in the greenbelt.
Okay. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Also in person, I'm hoping is Darren Seamark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillors. My name's Darren. I live directly adjacent to this development in Middlewood Close. There's lots of reasons why this proposal ought to be refused. Infrastructure, access problems, drainage problems. A lot of these people will cover those for you. I'd like to primarily focus on the greenbelt and the wildlife aspect of this proposal. But before I do, I'd just like to touch the traffic aspect of it. It said in the proposal that I got that one vehicle a week will attend the pig farm that is across the fields from this development. It's a lot more than one vehicle a week. It's several vehicles a day we're talking about. Large Arctics loaded with pigs and tractors with trailers carrying back pig slurry. These will have to drive directly through the proposed development to get back onto the Wetherby Road. So be under no illusions that this is the big trucks, the 40-foot trailers. And as you saw from that picture where they showed the cars looking from the development and it shows the cars parked, that's a normal day. We're directly next to a school and twice a day, drop-off time and pick-up time, the whole street is surrounded by cars. So trying to get a truck through that would be a nightmare, not to mention dangerous. I want to focus directly on the wildlife because I know I haven't got much time.
You've had 2 minutes so far, so you've got a minute.
There's wild deer, there's a big stag and a lot of his lady friends that live on this land for this proposal. And there's wildlife, there's foxes, there's tawny owls, there's even a species of bats that roost in the trees. I don't think a lot of consideration has been taken to them. And the light pollution from a development would ruin that. On the committee report that you've got for today's meeting, I'd like to draw your attention to the background and relevant history section.
About 20 seconds.
Yeah. Under 1.5 and 1.6. And if I can just quote from 1.5, the application site lies within the general extent of the Greenbelt as set out in the safe policies Y1 and YH9 of the Yorkshire and Humberside Plan, Regional Spatial Strategy. The proposed development is inappropriate development, which by definition is harmful to the Greenbelt. There would be harm to openness. The development would lead to encroachment into the countryside.
Thank you, Mr. Seamark. Thank you.
And would not encourage
Thank you.
the recycling of derelict land.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop you there because it's only fair to other speakers.
Yeah.
You've had
I appreciate
a little bit more than the 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for your contributions. If you don't rush off again, because I can see already there are some questions from members, so bear with us. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you. You mentioned the vehicles associated with the pig unit.
Yeah.
Going through the development. So am I correct in thinking that the development, the track that goes into the fields that goes across to the pig unit?
Yeah, it doesn't actually show it on there. The pig unit on that picture is down that lane that's heading up towards 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
See that fine?
Yeah.
So it goes through off the Weatherby Road onto Middlewood Close, through the development, through the proposed development, and then onto that wiggly line at the back. The pig unit is about 500 yards inland of that. And we can smell it strongly, as you can imagine, like 40 degrees we've just had in summer. The pig unit 500 yards away is smelly. And when it starts driving, they drive these trucks of trailers and everything. We knew when we lived there, when we moved there, that there was a pig unit, and that's not open for things.
Okay.
What
Can I stop you there?
They're actually driving through
the
development.
It's been helpful to answer that question. Are there any other questions? Thank you ever so much.
Thank you
for your
listening.
contribution.
Thank you.
Okay. Again, I understand him in person, Ian Martin. Three minutes.
Hello, I'm a resident of Middlewood Close, and I've spoken to all the residents of Middlewood Close, and there's a strong objection from the Close and from the village, and that was confirmed at the parish council meeting. My principal objection is that it's on Greenbelt and the developer hasn't established special circumstances, and nothing has principally changed since you last rejected the proposal. I'm aware that this is allocated on the draft plan, but the draft plan has not been approved yet, so this land remains Greenbelt. And I think the concern is that if we start developing on Greenbelt, that sets a precedent for future development within the village. I know that there have been special circumstances within the York area for development within the Greenbelt, but this is a small development. It doesn't really establish the special circumstances that are necessary for use of that land. I've got serious concerns on top of the Greenbelt about the infrastructure. It's already been stated about the sewage there. The records from Yorkshire Water are inaccurate. Only, I think in the past month, we've had a number of call outs. We've had flooding, ingress of sewage further upstream there. So that's significant. Middlewood Close itself floods when there's heavy rain. That's not been addressed. We've also talked about the traffic on Middlewood Close, and you look at the road surface, it's already damaged. I have concerns and raised concerns with the school about parking. If you look at the picture there, it shows you parking if you go back to the picture of Middlewood Close, you can see the parking now. That's at a quiet time. You look at school pickup and drop off. The whole of Middlewood Close is full of cars parked on the pavement. I've got a serious safeguarding concern for children and having to go on the roads. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have more traffic. So those are my principal concerns, but it's the green belt really, and it's being on the green belt that is the main concern there. And I think there is no special circumstances for this.
Okay. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you. I was going to touch on those specific issues around the green belt. So if this was taken out of the green belt in September and the application was coming then, would you still be objecting as strongly as you are now if it was not green belt land?
I think that would change my objection. I would still be objecting. But at the moment, my principal objection is that it is green belt, and I think we can't at the moment, unless somebody's got a crystal ball, we can't look and sort of anticipate what the decision is going to be made about the green belt. And I think it would be wholly wrong. Now, if the situation changes and we're sat here and this has been allocated as development land, well, I think that's a different conversation there. But at the moment, it remains green belt. And as I say, I cannot see any special circumstances that warrant development on this land.
Councillor Pavlovic.
Although you say that there was no change, you may be aware that the local plan examination hearings took place after the first application, and the green belt, including this site, were discussed, and there were no representations to take it to retain it within the green belt. So from a development perspective, there has been a significant change in that this was discussed at the local plan examination process. Were you aware of that?
I wasn't, and I think
does that therefore alter the tenor, if you like, or the thrust of your objection?
So I think a couple of concerns. I think that in terms of notification of the reapplication of the planning permission, that was not wide. I think only those people backing onto the development were notified. So the village as a whole wasn't aware of this. I wasn't aware in terms of the ability to object about the change of. So I'm not sure whether I could have had any sort of influence on that, but certainly I received no notification that was happening, and certainly had no opportunity, as I see it, to make representations. So I don't think it changes my point of view that what you're proposing is development on green belt, and unless it's changed from green belt in the meantime, which I'm not aware that it has, then I don't think it changed my position.
Okay, Councillor Fenton.
Just picking up the issue of parking and the photograph did, I think, accurately describe the issues in terms of pavement parking. Obviously, that's a pre-existing issue. To what extent do you believe this development would make that clearly bad situation worse?
Well, I think the thing is that to start with, I don't believe the development has any pavements on it. To my understanding, I'm happy to be corrected. So what you're looking at is you're looking at very difficult access in terms of we can't, as residents, during the sort of school pickup and drop off time, we can't use the pavements. So you correct that. So that's an existing condition, but it's worsening. It's, I would say year on year, it's worsening. And I only see this development making it even worse. And then on top of that, there's no thoroughfare there. So at least what you've not got is you've not got a steady stream of traffic there. But what you're going to now have by putting that development in there is you're going to create additional danger for the people who are having to access the Middlewood Close as pedestrians.
No further questions? Thank you very much. Thanks for your contribution. And then I think joining us remotely Catherine Martin.
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you absolutely
Oh,
clearly.
lovely.
So you have
Thank
3
you.
minutes if you want to address the committee.
Okay, thank you. My name's Catherine Martin. I live on Middlewood. I'm a resident of Middlewood Close. I want to object to the planning application for the following reasons. The proposed development is on greenbelt land. This land has no special circumstances attached to it that outweigh the significant harm to the openness that this development would cause. Building on greenbelt land is an encroachment into the countryside, and it does not encourage developers to recycle existing derelict or brownfield sites. Is this because it's cheaper and easier to dig up a field? If this development goes ahead, it would mean that any pocket of greenbelt land with no special circumstances, be it in Rufforth or a national park, would be fair game for landowners, land agents and developers to make big profits from and cause significant harm to open spaces, wildlife and the environment. The sewage system is not adequate for the current properties using it, and 21 new houses will add an unsustainable pressure. Yorkshire Water was called out just in October 2022 and then previously in June 2022 to unblock the sewage pipes. I worry that the development will happen and then the residents and Yorkshire Water will be left to deal with a sewage system that blocks even more frequently than it does now. The changing climate means that Middlewood Close cul-de-sac itself and also the gardens collect standing water after heavy rain, and the drains do not adequately take it away. And I worry that this would be made much worse with water actually coming into the houses if more land is sealed over. Rufforth is a linear village, and this development is completely disproportionate in comparison with the small developments of recycled land that have taken place in recent years, for example, behind the pub and behind the coalman's house. In addition, Middlewood Close, as the access road, is very narrow and not suitable to service the number of cars that would need to use it. I feel that the council should be taking steps to address the climate emergency by incentivising landowners to plant trees and rewild land rather than selling it to developers once planning permission has been granted. People who are lucky enough to own greenbelt land are the custodians of the land and should be protecting it for future generations. Surely we can all agree that it's a privilege to own a field of greenbelt land and it should be taken care of. Thank you very much.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you.
Okay. Do stay with us for a moment because I'm going to give opportunity for members to ask questions. I don't see any. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you.
And again, in person, I think, Mark Reynolds. When you're ready, Mark.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Mark Reynolds. I'm a villager of Rufforth, and I'm just here in that capacity, to be fair. But I do work in the built environment, and I moved to Rufforth because of its green belt and its great environment and the wonderful fields that surround the area. This site was refused only a matter of months ago as the site was in green belt. The site has not moved, nor have the boundaries changed. Now, I hear what you're saying about there's been consultations, but it's either in and it's right, and you've got to make a decision on today, not what will happen in 3 months, 10 months, a year's time. So you got to base it on the merits of you deciding today, not in the future, what may or may not happen, because none of us have crystal balls. The residents of Rufforth turned out in force at the parish council meeting to object to this development as it was in Greenbelt, amongst other issues that they raised: drainage, parking. I won't bore you with the items because the people that have gone before me have raised those. But there is substantial objections in the village to the development. And it's worth noting that the parish council voted to object to this development, and I think the notes are there for you to read. One of the latest drawings appears to show the boundary extending further into the green belt. I'm told it's for drainage but that extends the boundary of the development and could be used in the future for other phases or whatever. Next item, I still don't see the special circumstances for this development to go ahead in Greenbelt. Ask yourselves, what's special about it? What's special compared to what as a village and a country and human beings, what we're going to lose? If the previous refusal is overturned, it's going to set a precedent not only to build in Greenbelt, but to keep applying for permissions to get what you want. You know, us mere mortals, you have a decision and you accept that or you appeal. You don't just keep going and applying because you don't like the terms of it. So I just don't get it. But I think that if the developments are approved, you've got a massive potential to fire the shooting pistol on developments in Greenbelt.
30 seconds.
Okay. I think there's potentially a legal argument for the owner of the horse field because he got legitimate planning permission for that and still using it. So this development, as he rightly said, is going to impact on that massively and make it unusable. He got legal planning permission for that. He went to the right courses, he played the game and he did it. And this plot was removed from plans to be developed in there. So we need to keep Greenbelt for communities and for food securities.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
But as you've already seen, there may be questions from members.
Of course.
Councillor Eyre.
I think you said you moved to the area because you like the area. So I suppose my question is, do you think Rufforth as a village should grow at all over the next 25 years, or that there is exactly the right number of houses and it couldn't take any more houses in the next 20 years?
It's a linear village. To grow it linear.
Any other questions? No. Thank you very much. Thanks for your contribution. And our last public speaker, James Gibson, will be attending to answer questions alongside the speaker, who is Mark Lane. Mark, if you'll take the microphone, please. I understand both in support of the applicant, of course. That's helpful.
Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. As you'll be aware, this scheme went to Planning Committee B in August with an officer recommendation of approval, but was refused. The application has now been appealed and the appeal will be heard next year. The application was refused on the basis that the scheme comprised inappropriate development, and Committee B concluded that no very special circumstances had been demonstrated to outweigh the harm identified by that committee. The matters raised in that decision are very comprehensively addressed in your officer's report, and I wholly agree with them. In particular, I strongly agree with your officer's conclusion that very special circumstances do in fact exist that outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt. These very special circumstances are the same circumstances that the City of York Council have previously recognised and accepted when granting planning permission to other proposed allocations in the general extent of the Greenbelt, notably H31 in Dunnington and ST31 in Cotmanthorpe. This is a material consideration in assessing this application because, as you'll be aware, the courts have held that consistency in decision-making is important to developers and local planning authorities. Given the City Council have granted a number of planning permissions on land in the general extent of the Greenbelt, based on the same very special circumstances, the developer had a legitimate expectation that planning permission would be granted. There are a number of additional points that I would make. These are that the site is shown to lie within the Greenbelt in the neighbourhood plan. However, there is a clear resolution in the appendices to that document to amend the Greenbelt following the adoption of the local plan and to allocate the site for housing. The neighbourhood plan was supported by 93% of the respondents, a very substantial portion of the community, and that resolution. H38, which is this site, is a long-standing housing allocation in the local plan, which has been proposed and supported by the council. The council have already decided that this is a sustainable location for residential development. And unlike some of the speakers before me, this has been an allocation since 2013. For the last 10 years, the council have supported this as an allocation. It's never wavered, never changed, never dropped out. Indeed, this is probably one of the least contentious and most long-standing proposed allocations in the entire plan. The green belt boundaries have been thoroughly assessed by the council, and the council, in supporting the allocation, have concluded that the site does not need to be kept permanently open. There's no outstanding policy objections to H38, as we've already heard. This increases the weight that can be given to the allocation. The main modifications to the local plan are to be expected next year, and as I'm aware, there are no modifications to this site. And as we've heard from Councillor Pavlik, the phase 4 sessions of the EIP into the local plan have been heard, and no debates about the green belt boundaries here were considered. Therefore, the site will be there are no amendments in the inspector's recommendations in relation to this site. This site will remain as a housing allocation. There are no objections from technical consultees, and in particular the scheme accords with the council's highway design guidance, and neither Yorkshire Water or the IDB objected to the development. There's no objection from public protection, and the scheme will provide a range and choice of housing that will assist with the council's 5-year housing land supply. It will also provide 6 affordable units, which is consistent with council policy, which will help meet that substantial shortfall.
You could come to a close.
I just recommend endorse your officer's recommendation and hope you will approve the application.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, I was a little generous with the time, but we've had quite a number of speakers in objection, and for reasons of fairness, I didn't want to be too quick to close you down. But I will be very surprised if there aren't questions, and I'm going to give that opportunity. First of all, to Councillor Fenton, then to Councillor Pambeck.
Thank you, Chair. Issues have been raised in relation to the sewage system. Am I correct in thinking that as part of the development, a separate foul and surface water system would be installed rather than simply feeding into what, by the sounds of it, is already an stretched local system?
If I can take that, I'm James Gibson. I prepared the flood risk and drainage impact assessment. The surface water, to clarify that in relation to the capacity of the sewerage, the surface water is discharged to the drainage ditch to the northeast. That is a separate entirely system, as you point out, and equally there'll be a separate foul system as well. Yorkshire Water were consulted as part of the application. They confirmed the point of discharge and didn't allude to any issues downstream with the network. And the local lead flood authority have been consulted on it. They equally approved the drainage principles within the scheme. So in answer to your question, yes, definitely 2 sets of separate systems with sufficient capacity to take the flows.
Councillor Pavlik.
Thank you. Mr. Lane, you made a couple of comments that I just really want to explore a little bit with you. You expanded slightly on the point that I'd made with one of the earlier speakers about the phase 4 hearings of the local plan, and you said this will be adopted as a housing development site when the plan is adopted. Excuse me, how can you be so sure?
That's quite easy to counsel. That there's no objections to the site, so the plan is deemed sound unless there is objections. The inspector's got nothing before him to say that this allocation is in any way other than what the council wish to see. So the inspectors have nothing to look at, so they can't actually deem this site to be anything other than sound.
Thank you. And the second point was in respect of the neighbourhood plan, which, as you said, had identified this site as suitable for housing. But it does say that it's in the green belt and therefore they can't allocate it as housing. Why can a neighbourhood plan not allocate a site for housing?
A good question, councillor. I mean, that's also quite relatively simple to answer. The neighbourhood plan can't amend the green belt. The definition of the green belt is to be left to the local plan and to the city council. It's the city council's decision, not the neighbourhood plan. So the neighbourhood plan had no choice but to keep and show the general extent of the green belt as previously established in the regional spatial strategy. However, there's a clear commitment in the neighbourhood plan that as soon as the local plan is adopted, they will almost immediately amend their neighbourhood plan to include this as a housing allocation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. I think this question probably goes to Mr. Gibson. The access, you've chosen to use a joint use access for pedestrians and vehicles. We have those in Strensall. They are absolutely awful. Could you explain your rationale for not providing pavements as a safe place for pedestrians to walk on, please? Because I'll emphasise, at the last planning B meeting, I abstained on this. My sole reason for abstention was I couldn't get a clear answer as to why you've gone for that, which in my view, I know highways haven't objected, but in my view, it's not ideal. And I would urge you to reconsider that.
If I can respond by saying, councillor, that it's been developed as a design that's been acceptable with the City of York Council guidance. It's a shared surface to try and encourage the safety of pedestrians. It's not a segregated surface. It slows vehicles down, and it's an acceptable, adoptable surface.
There is an additional point there, councillor, if I may, but the shared surface has been evolved to ensure that we retain that important tree on the corner. So it provides a bit more scope to get around that tree. Whereas if you had pavements on both sides, there would be an impact on that tree and we'd probably have to lose that. So that was a way forward to keep that and retain that rather important tree.
Thank you.
Okay, councillor de Gorn.
I have a couple of questions. One relates to the issue of flooding, and just so I'm clear in terms of understanding it, you mentioned the fact that the separate stormwater drainage would be to the northeast. On that plan, is that's away from the existing development, is it? I'm sort of getting my bearings as it were on the map.
Yeah, so, just at the edge on the northeast, top right hand corner. Yeah.
So just in response to the concerns about surface water flooding, am I right in thinking that what you're saying is that all the majority of the storm drainage from the site would be away from the current habitation, as it were?
Very much so.
Wouldn't be adding to it.
Completely the opposite side, yes. We've already gained land drainage consent with an application to discharge at the greenfield discharge rate into the watercourse, so we don't increase flood risk off-site. And we're providing approximately 315 cubic meters of storage to balance those excess flows. We're dealing with the 1 in 100-year event. We're dealing with climate change and the potential for urban creep, all in accordance with the LLFA guidance.
And in relation to the foul drainage, that is going to have a pumping station. Will that supplement? Will that be into the existing foul drainage for the rest of the what name of it? Middlewood Close?
Yes, the sewer runs virtually from 11 o'clock to 4 o'clock through the site to the side of the site, to the west side of the site. Yorkshire Water were consulted. They've given us permission and specifically told us where to discharge, which is to a 225 millimeter sewer that runs, as I mentioned. They've not alluded to any issues. They've not prevented us from doing so. It's gone through their consultation process and they've not raised any objections. So
it's in line with their recommendations to address the concerns that are already being experienced, is what you're saying.
So, and unfortunately, if those concerns of the residents, we are unable to influence the public sewer. We've consulted upon the discharge, and yes, they've given us that assurance that that's where we can discharge.
So if I can come back, just one more question, if that's okay, in relation to the the vehicle movements that you've alluded to, and I see now that the design you say is to try and retain an existing mature tree. We've heard that track is used for larger vehicles. I assume that the geometry of that layout is sufficient to cater for Arctic vehicles. Is it intended that once completed, this will become adopted highway? And if so, is it expected that there will be restriction? I mean, obviously, I'm concerned about the mention about school run impact, and particularly as has been alluded to, if there's no footway and no parking restrictions, would that then not be a concern? But you could end up with a lot of people who don't live in the area parking in front of the development you're creating.
I think from a tracking point of view and a vehicle movements point of view, the radii, the width of the carriageways, again, in line with the policies that are required. Touching on parking, there's parking provision within the development, obviously, for each house, and the shared surface, as we've touched on before.
And is a visitor parking, or is that down to each household to provide that?
There's a policy compliant level of car parking. In fact, actually, if I'm not mistaken, actually, it's slightly above policy level of parking on the site. So, you know, the parking is in accordance with policy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Doughty.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions as well, please. I was interested to hear you talk about consistency in decision making, and as we note, this came to committee here, albeit committee B, just a few months ago, and that committee decided to turn down the application. What would you say is the main difference between that application and this, other than the reference that we see on paragraph 1.6 on page 74 about the drainage, extra bit of land for drainage, but as the officers noted, does not materially change the overall extent of the development being proposed. So what would you say is the main benefit in this application over the one that was refused previously?
Well, if I understand that question correctly, I mean, things have moved on, as touched upon earlier. The examination has now concluded its phase 4 sessions, which were the sessions to consider the detailed greenbelt boundaries. So the site in planning policy terms is more advanced, and more weight can be given to the local plan. And therefore things have moved on. But also, I don't think when this application came to committee last time that members fully understood the very special circumstances that were put forward, which were the same very special circumstances that members of York City Council had approved a number of other applications also in the general extent of the green belt. So I don't think the committee fully understood the case that was put for them. So we're back here today to try and explain that, and also to move things forward, because the plans move forward and more weight can be attached to it.
Thank you. And my second question, if I may, Chair. One of the speakers earlier actually commented on a pig unit in close proximity. Now, I've had experience in my own ward in the past, again with a pig farm and also with some dog kennels, when some new development was built in close proximity to them. Those businesses ended up suffering through continual complaints from the new residents, from the new properties, to businesses that already existed. Would you be willing, and I'm guessing we'd need a steer from the council legal team as well, would, if it comes to the point where there was a vote for approval, would you be in agreement with some kind of condition that would stipulate that would eliminate risk from the council, because it was the council was the threat was from residents was on a kind of statutory nuisance kind of level for businesses that already existed, and then the council actually put pressure on these businesses and the farms to limit what they could do. So would you be prepared for a condition that would protect?
Councillor, I'm not convinced this is a question we could put to the applicant at this point. I don't know whether.
Well, may I, Chair?
If you want to respond.
Well, as far as it's not the pig unit, as you say, is an isolation unit, so it's not a formal pig farm as such. Pigs will be taken there from time to time when there's a risk of disease, and they have to be isolated from the main group of pigs. So it's not a, shall we say, a large-scale farming operation to the northeast, but also that's in the same ownership of the field that we're debating today as well. So I don't see the landowner complaining, because it's the same landowner.
Okay. Obviously, there was a reference to smell earlier.
We've had that done. There was an odour assessment undertaken in the worst time for however many years in 40-degree heat. The odour assessment was done then, and there was no issue with odour from either the pig farm or the stables to the south.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Councillor Fenton.
One of the public speakers spoke about the proximity of the horse arena and potential loss of neighbour amenity because of he sort of described it as having a hedge between horses and residents. I just wondered what engagement or consultation you've undertaken with neighbouring residents and businesses in terms of identifying those potential issues and how they might be mitigated as part of any development.
Thank you, Councillor. So as you would expect from a reputable developer, we did do public consultation as part of the first application. We sent out leaflets to the community. We had very little response at that time. We also discussed the application before it was submitted with the town council, the village council, the parish council, should I say? Thank you for nodding and correcting me. And that wasn't an issue raised then. In the boundary in question, there is a hedgerow there, which is a nice hedgerow. Other forms of mitigation could be provided, like a fence or a noise attenuation barrier. And that might have implications for the hedge, but if that was an issue, that could be provided in its place.
The gentleman at the back, I see you've raised your hand, but I'm sorry that the way that the planning works, there is no further public engagement at this point of the meeting. I'm sorry, I can't give you that platform. No, please, no, thank you, no, thank you, no. Other further questions? Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much. That being the case, there are no further questions from members. Members have the opportunity to seek clarification from officers. Councillor Eyre.
I've got a few, so I'm happy for you to move around. The first one's about the separate systems for surface and foul. Now, as a ward councillor, my experience is that's a wonderful system when it's first put in, but the question is about how you manage to control that, because what tends to happen is when people build extensions, they put the surface water into the nearest possible drain because no one's looking. And if that's a sewerage, then it goes straight into the sewerage, which is why all across my ward I have issues with surface water impacting on sewerage. And it's very difficult to tell when someone's extension pipe comes straight down into a block of concrete, if they say they've tapped it into the surface one rather than the sewerage. What controls and checks do we have through planning to ensure that we have a robust policy of making sure people aren't putting future surface water into sewerage?
I get your question, but we can only consider what's in front of us now in terms of the drainage and how it would work. And we've been told by both the applicant and the relevant consultees that they consider that this will work. I can't do an if or a but in the future in terms of any further conditions, it will work as applied for, and then there is the expectation if an extension was to happen that it would be drained correctly. I know what you're saying, but it isn't for this application to overcome further future issues.
Further questions? I can give you your next one.
Yeah, I was at some level of confusion. Who produced the neighbourhood plan? I would have assumed, I'm just going to go back to my memory because it would have been me that chaired it, that it was the parish council that will have produced the neighbourhood plan, but they're now objecting to their own neighbourhood plan. Is that correct?
They're not objecting to the neighbourhood plan, they're objecting to this site.
So they're objecting to their own neighbourhood plan, or part of their own neighbourhood plan.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sure you'll have other opportunities. I'll come back to you later. Councillor Fisher.
Point of information on that. Neighbourhood plans are not necessarily drawn up by the parish council. They may be drawn up in consultation with it, but they're not necessarily drawn up by the parish council.
Councillor de Gorn, then Councillor Combane.
It's a question which relates to highways. Having asked that question about potential impact of school run parking, and also in particular the access, of larger vehicles through to the pig farm. Has there been any discussion or consideration about particularly parking restriction on the first, that S bit, that in order to maintain safe access to and from the pig farm? Right, pig unit, sorry. Pig unit.
Introduce yourself again, because that would be helpful.
Yeah, sorry, Ian Stokes, Principal Development Control Engineer Planning. Yes, in considering our comments on this application, we actually did site visits at school run time. And contrary to what previous comments have been made about, we looked at Middlewood Close and there wasn't any additional parking from the school run, or if there was, it was very little. The majority of the school run parking was on a street further down here because it's slightly wider, and on the other side of the road, to the point where people tried to run me over when I was standing on the corner. In terms of the school, there's also a zebra crossing here with a school crossing patrol. So actually the safest routes for people to park and walk to school are down here and down here. There is very little parking along here. In terms of the development itself, there is a feature to be put in here, which shows a clear delineation between the construction of Middlewood Close and the proposed access to the development. This is a low-speed development. It falls between two parts of our highways design guide for a minor access road and a shared surface. I believe there is scope still to reconsider the surfacing of this area, and there is a condition attached to this. So it may well revert to a traditional highway with footpaths. This will all be designed through tracking, including how to get waste wagons down here. And we'll need to look again at the access to this facility because it's the first I'm aware that there are actually HGVs using it. I think we need to get clarification of the size and type of vehicle using that facility.
So what you're saying is that would be covered by conditions we've got in here about the details to be supplied and agreed with the local authority. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask members if there are further questions around highways issues that we raise those now? No, no more. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Councillor Cobain. No, I'm sorry. Councillor Cobain.
Thanks. Can I just point to clarification, maybe touching on legal a little bit. A number of the speakers said that if we approve this planning application, we will set a precedent for building in the green belt, including national parks. So if you could address that issue, that would be appreciated. And also a question as to whether or not the agent of change legislation applies to developments such as this, so that if new settlers were to complain about the smell from the existing not a pig farm, then would the agent of change legislation protect the not a pig farm owners?
So your first question, just say it to me again, because I was.
A number of the speakers said that if we approve this
Precedent, right, yeah,
development,
okay.
would
So-
it set a precedent for building in the Greenbelt?
You'll be bored of me saying this, but it's each application on its own merits. So you have to consider what you've got in front of you today, including all the information that you've got in the case officer's report, the different circumstances to the last time it was considered. That's everything that you need to consider right now, and that it won't necessarily set a precedent, but you have got to consider the fact that there's also been approval on other allocated sites within the plan. The other two that were previously mentioned. Agent of change, that's not a planning policy, but we have we've spoken to public protection. They haven't raised any issues in terms of the pig farm, and we don't think it would be to a degree that wouldn't allow this development to come forward.
Okay. Councillor Pavlovich.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, for residents nearby, and we've heard from them tonight, this is a very emotive and close to home, literally and metaphorically, issue. What I want to ask you about is where we stand now. Committee in August refused this. The objectors have said nothing's changed. There clearly has been a change in as much as we've heard, the local plan hearings have taken place, and there were no objections to this site made at those hearings. Mark Lane said on behalf of the applicant, well, therefore it is going to be a housing development site. Is that a statement that you would concur with?
I think I have to be slight more caution than that, because that is saying that the local plan will get adopted and it will go through. We absolutely 100% hope that that is the case, but I can't guarantee that at this point in time. But what I think Mark was meaning was that there should be no change to this allocation should the local plan be successful and become adopted. So that's where we are with this, given that at the last set of hearings, which are completely right, there were no representations on this.
Yeah, sorry, I should have caveated that, saying, should the plan be adopted this coming year, will this be a housing development site?
Should it be adopted, we have every indication that it will be.
And secondly, and linked to that, because I'm trying to make it very clear, as crystal clear as I possibly can, about the limitations that a planning committee member has, is the neighbourhood plan, which identified this site as being potentially suitable, but couldn't make an allocation because of the local plan process. How much weight does a planning committee have to give to that?
To a neighbourhood plan.
To a neighbourhood plan.
As it stands, you have to give it full weight because it's in the
Full weight. Thank you. I'm asking questions that I already know the answer to, but I think it's important that it's made as clear as it can be to everybody watching and here tonight.
Councillor Fenton, I'll come to you in just a moment, but just further to the questions that Councillor Pavlovich was asking, can you be clear exactly what difference in terms of how much additional weight might be given the fact that we've had this further stage in the local plan hearings? Can you just help us to understand how that, if it does indeed change the weight that would be allocated compared to the situation when this was considered previously by another committee?
Yes, so at the last committee, we hadn't gone through the fourth phase of the hearings. At that point, we didn't know if there was going to be any changes to any of the allocations to the Greenbelt, specifically this one. Obviously, the hearings took place. There was no objections and there is no proposals to change this allocation as part of the local plan. Given that,
we have to think it has got more weight than it did last time. It's then for members of this committee to consider that as part of the very special circumstances that have been outlined in this report, along with the 5-year housing land supply that's been illustrated in your additional information today. That all adds in terms of the weight that potentially is different to last time you considered the application.
Yeah, that's helpful. Councillor Fenton.
Just a quick question around public transport. And I know from the section 106 references in the report, it's proposed that there are contributions towards public open space and play. Obviously, I know it's not for this committee to say why didn't you put in that, but I think given the relatively perilous state of the 412 bus service that is the only service that serves Rufforth, was there any consideration given to access to sustainable modes of travel, namely buses, being one of the considerations for section 106?
In answer to that question, and perhaps Ian can clarify or confirm, it's ultimately a matter of the scale of development. If we were perhaps into the realms of there being, multiple dozens, hundreds, then yes, that may well have been the case. But in this particular instance with 21 dwellings, I don't believe it would meet the thresholds for any sort of measures like that.
Councillor, you said you had several questions, so. Okay. Okay. So I don't see any more questions just now. I think it would be helpful just to take, others have indicated they'd appreciate just a short break. So just a 5-minute break at this point. And reconvene in 5 minutes.
Okay. That's me. Thank you very much.
we. Thank you. So we reached the point with this application where we can move into debate. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take this one. It's Michael Stowe. I think it probably won't surprise any members around this particular table that I will be supporting the local plan and the allocation to be having the local plan. That's taken us a significant, a massively significant amount of time to achieve that process, to look at our greenbelt boundaries and assess our greenbelt boundaries robustly. And so I think while we're at a point of not having the amount of weight I would like to have behind the local plan, we're not far from being at that point where we can give it substantial weight. In terms of this particular site, and I know Becky had to be on thing, I do kind of concur with the applicant. I am under no illusion that this site will be developed in the foreseeable future, be that whether it's approved here today, whether it's approved at appeal, or whether it's adopted into the local plan and subsequently taken out of the greenbelt. The question is, how do we go about doing this? So I think the approach we're taking would actually protect the village more than it would in terms of damaging it. I know one of the speakers mentioned that it would be preferable for the village to grow linear, and I think it's not for us to look at how we do that. We went through a robust process of looking at those greenbelt boundaries and choosing what we thought were the most appropriate sites. This particular area is 21 sites over the next 25 years for the whole of the village. That's been deemed as the most appropriate expansion of that particular village. And I think the biggest threat to that actually would be in terms of the local plan not being adopted. I think that would be the biggest threat to the village. If the local plan was not adopted, then the process for adopting a new local plan would be on far higher. Housing figures would take far more greenbelt, and I would suspect we'll see far more allocations in this particular area. And I think in the interim period, while we get to that local plan, we will be demonstrating, we would completely struggle to demonstrate a 5-year land supply for the next probably 3 to 4 years in terms of achieving those higher targets that were set through there. So I think that in itself would set a very clear precedent that most of the greenbelt in the city would be up for grabs under the very special circumstances of 5-year land supply. Our best approach to protecting the greenbelt is to get the local plan adopted and demonstrate that we have that 5-year land supply, we have the housing allocations, and that takes away all of the uncertainty from around there, and will take away all the uncertainty from around this particular village. So I say we had that conversation about precedent. I don't think in any way, not that it's particularly planning matter, it doesn't set a precedent for any of the greenbelt sites in the city other than those which have been included in the emerging local plan as housing allocations. That is the issue that is there. There are not many other sites around there that can demonstrate that they have been in a emerging local plan for 9 years, I think we were told in terms of that, never taken out, and very clear approval, and also the support of the neighbourhood plan, which backs that one up, which I believe 93% of those voted in favour of that particular allocation, not that it's technically, but that site being the appropriate area to be developed within Rufforth. So I think I come down to the point of what would we achieve if we were to not support approval here today, and fully appreciate the views of the previous planning committee, and I'm sure Janet could tell me a lot more about Pyrrhus and 279 BC's victory over the Romans, but I think we would be heading for a massive Pyrrhic victory and a particularly expensive one. I don't think we would be able to defend this appeal at the same time that we're arguing to the planning inspector that this is the most appropriate site for housing development. I think we would massively lose that. The site would be developed with less controls than it is now. So I think my general view, unless anyone can persuade me otherwise, is that I do believe there are very special circumstances, and I would put forward to accept the officer's recommendation.
Councillors Pavlovic and then Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. Being on a planning committee is one of those thankless tasks in some respects, because if you listen to arguments from objectors and from those people who are genuinely very concerned about the impact of a development next to their house, in their immediate area, and you decide that you can't support that, the obvious accusation is, well, they didn't listen to a single word we said. But being a member of the planning committee actually brings with it some responsibilities, and those responsibilities are that we have to comply with the legislation that is governing how this committee and all planning committees can operate. And I've heard and I have every sympathy with the comments that have been made, but there has been a fundamental change since the last set of hearings, and that was that this site, amongst all the other sites, did go to the phase 4 hearings in September. There were no representations to take it out, and that means that as and when the plan is adopted, whether it's in 3 months, whether it's in 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, when that plan is adopted, this will be a housing development site. And if we were, and Councillor Eck, I think quite rightly says, if it was to be refused today, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. It would not be fair to the residents nearby who are in objection, because it would lose. There are no defensible grounds on planning grounds for it to be refused. And so, you know, with every sympathy for those that have a contrary view, it's not one that I can concur with, and therefore I second the motion to approve.
I will give opportunity for others to just speak into the debate before we go to vote, but I've noted that. Councillor Fisher and then Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you, Chair. Just quoting on page 111, paragraph 5111, from paragraph 50 of the NPPF, where planning permission is refused on the grounds of prematurity, the local planning authority will need to indicate clearly how granting permission for the development concerned will prejudice the outcome of the plan making process. Well, it won't. And so we can't refuse on the grounds of prematurity. Some members of Planning B mentioned that. But if we refused it on the grounds of prematurity, it's a greenbelt site and it shouldn't be approved until the local plan is adopted, we will get absolutely destroyed on appeal, because we're clearly going against policy, and planning committees have to comply with policy. Now, I don't like the highway access at all, and I made that clear. But again, highways have not objected to it. It's compliant with policy. So I'm going to change my vote from abstention, and I will be voting for approval.
Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Fisher has drawn attention to what I think is one of the weakest points of the objectors' arguments, and of course we will all have sympathy for people who are about to have a housing development built right next to their homes. But the issue is whether or not this will be premature, given the adoption of the local plan hasn't formally gone through yet. And I think Councillor Fisher hits the nail on the head with his reference to 511, that we can't refuse it on the grounds that it's premature and it would jeopardise the local plan, when the local plan is exactly what we've got for building houses there. So, having read through the papers, you know, I did come here tonight minded to support the officer's recommendation. Obviously, your mind can be changed by the what is said from the floor and across Zoom. And my mind nearly was changed, actually, when the developer sat there and told you were all stupid for not understanding it properly last time it came here. But, you know, not having been on that committee, then they might be right. I don't know. But I would say that it's not the best line of argument. It did nearly make me think, oh, hang on a minute here. But you can't make determinations on that basis. You have to make determinations based upon what we can do within the planning system. And as far as I can see, the only conclusion that we can come to within the planning system and within planning rules is to approve this application. And I think also the fact that there's been no objections from ward councillors here tonight. I think they also know that the game is up on this one, and it would have been a futile task. So I would also be minded to approve the application.
Do any other members wish to speak at this point? Otherwise, we'll go to the vote. Councillor de Gorne.
Just to agree with the points that have been made about this being an allocated site and there not being objections through the local plan process. So I think, you know, that is significant change from the situation in the summer. I am reassured that, you know, a significant amount of thought has gone into the drainage and potential flooding aspects. I'm sure there will still be further concerns, but it does sound to me as though that the design and so on, there are safeguards in for that. And the points to be also about the highway. I don't really have a problem with shared space as long as that is implemented in such a way as to prevent displacement parking from neighbouring areas. And the officer has said that hasn't been assessed as being a problem. Obviously, if it becomes a problem once the development's in place, then as a highway authority, if it is adopted, then that will be for us to sort out. So happy with that.
Okay. So I think we're at the point where we can put this to the vote. I don't think we've done anything in terms of changing any conditions, but go on, please.
So I just need members to be clear at this point, because we are making a different decision to the one at previous planning committee. In terms of the previous application was considered to be inappropriate in the green belt, that it would be harmful to openness, it would lead to encroachment in the countryside, and it wouldn't encourage the recycling of derelict land, for which no very special circumstances clearly outweigh the identified harm. At this point, I need members to confirm that they feel that they've made the balance, and they feel that this time that the weight of the very special circumstances is greater than they gave last time. It's whether or not you feel that any harm, because officers have advised that yes, there will be harm to openness, but we didn't feel there'd be an encroachment into the countryside or the issue with encouraging the recycling of derelict land, whereas that was previously put in. If members still consider that's an issue, but they still consider that there's very special circumstances to outweigh the harm, we just need to make sure we're clear that there's a difference in the weight this time to last time, to the very special circumstances.
Councillor Rare?
That went round in a lot of circles.
Sorry, that really did.
I mean, I don't believe that it doesn't encourage the recycling of derelict land. I think our derelict land is being absolutely hammered to death at the moment in terms of that was our concern previously. But I think through the local plan process, we have got a brownfield first policy, and that is working not necessarily as everyone would like, but it's certainly the brownfield sites are coming forward and being developed in that sense. Encroachment, I'm going to say that the very special circumstances outweigh it, but I don't think we need to outweigh the encouragement of recycling. And I don't believe it's encroachment, but does it make a difference if we say that?
No, it's good to be clear that you're giving more weight this time to the very special circumstances.
I don't feel like I was very clear then, but I am attempting to be clear that I do believe that.
That's all we need. That's what Sandra wanted.
So, sorry, Chair, can I clarify? Are you saying then that it's just harm to openness now? That's the greenbelt harm. No, it's just that we need to know really just to know why the decision has changed since last time. It's just we just need a minute, really.
We just need a minute
because of the previous decision. So are you saying then that there is harm yes, but it is considered that there are very special circumstances.
That's the same as
it's just the harm.
Yes.
Yeah. Great, thank you. We'll make sure that's minuted. Also, we need to refer the application to the Secretary of State, and then it needs to be subject to a 106. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
I think there's a few conditions that just need expanding a little. Conditions 8, 9, and 10 as well. If we want
to say more.
Say that again.
You feel there are conditions which need expanding?
Yeah, conditions 8, 9, and 10, or maybe just 8 and 10. Yeah.
Can we defer that to Chair and Vice Chair to agree? As per.
Okay.
Basically, they're standard highways conditions, and they don't come out in full on your reports, but they are there. It's just that it's how our system works. Mark can tell you them if you want to tell them. No, you're okay, fine.
Okay, so you're still content to second what has been proposed. Therefore, I think we are at the point where we can put this to the vote, are we? Good. Then those who are in favour of approval, please indicate. That is unanimous. That is approved. Thank you very much. I don't have any items of urgent business this evening. The meeting is closed.